Oh, this is the 8th lecture in Unit 5, Land and Water Use. We'll be talking about clear cutting and sustainable forestry. Clear cutting is basically the objectives are all about describe the effects of clear cutting on forests. Direct effects would be soil erosion. As you can see, if you remove all the trees, there's nothing there left to keep the soil. So the soil erosion is caused by no roots. All the organic materials are removed, and the deposits are going to go down into local streams, as you can see right here. Now, because of that, there's going to be a lot more soil in the water. It's going to affect the stream temperature. The loss of the branches of the trees are going to make the water warmer, and it's going to cause there to be problems with the fish, because certain fish can live in cool, certain fish will only live in warm. There'll also be landslides because there's no roots holding the soil in. There's going to be much more landslides, which will cause problems. Almost killed people here. As you can see, the car just barely stopped. So the logging compacts the soil, but because the sunlight drying it out, it makes it so that there's more likely to be a landslide, especially with the lack of the root structure. Now, one of the things that happens after we wipe out all the trees because of clear cutting is tree plantations are put in. When you put it in, you only put in one type of tree, and therefore the biodiverse mature forests are replaced by a single species of tree. Less diversity, lower resilience. If a blight comes in, it wipes every single tree. Less habitat for organisms except for those that can live on this. All of them are the same age. All trees planted at all the same time, all of them are the same age. It further lowers the biodiversity because there's no dead trees for woodpeckers, there's no decomposers, because there's none of the dead trees in here. Some of the benefits of forest is the air pollutants are removed. The leaf pore stomata remove volatile organic compounds, nitrous oxides, particulate matter. It removes it and stores it in the tree. It take in CO2, store the carbon as sugar, and releases oxygen for us to breathe. It's also a habitat for organisms. Many organisms live in a forest and require it, otherwise there's no place for them to live and no place to live. Deforestation, some of the consequences is it reduces the filtering of air, and it removes a place to sequester carbon. Cutting down releases the CO2 that had been sequestered because of the breakdown decomposition. The CO2 is put back into the atmosphere. Sometimes the way that they cut it down is something called slash and burn, where they cut it down and then instead of using the trees, they just burn it. And that releases the CO2 and nitrous oxides into the air, and water vapor, which will increase the global warming because they're all greenhouse gases. So the practice FRQ for section 5.2 is describe 2 ecosystem services provided for humans by forests. Explain how clear cutting would affect each ecosystem service that you described. Next, topic 5.17, sustainable forestry. How do we do it smart? Basically, the learning objective here is describe methods for getting over the human impact on the forest. So, doing sustainable is we minimize damage to the ecosystem. So if we do cut it down, we do it smart. So we can do selective cutting, where basically you go in like what was done here, and you don't cut all the trees, but you cut maybe the huge trees, leaving the smaller ones to grow. You don't clear cut, or you do what's called strip cutting, where you leave it areas, and in between areas you cut down all the you basically cut between areas, but you still leave it so that the pine cones and stuff like that can go into this area and repopulate it. You only cut certain trees, some of the trees in the area to preserve the habitat. You can also use human and pack animal labor to minimize soil compaction. As opposed to great big huge trucks, you use animals. You replant the trees immediately, some of them the same species that are being logged. So if you remove a certain type of evergreen, you replace that type of evergreen. Or if you're going to remove the Douglas firs, you're going to replace the Douglas firs. You minimize long-term productivity, maximize the long-term productivity of the land, and preserve it for future generations. This is not preserving it for future generations. Clear cutting. Sustainable practices, you use recycled wood or simply reusing without recycling. You use the same over and over, or you can use old lumber for something else. Wood can be chipped and used for mulch. You can replant the trees in areas that have been deforested, like it was done here, where you replant the trees, and in 20 years, it's all back. So only remove the diseased trees that have an infection, so that infection doesn't go throughout the entire forest. By removing only certain ones, it decreases the density, making the spread of this disease less likely. So you want to get rid of this right here, so you would cut down this tree, so this would not go to the other trees. Fire suppression. How do we stop natural fires? One, what we want to do is get rid of all this ground litter, because this ground litter is going to catch on fire, and it's going to make it much hotter. It's going to go from just a ground fire to a crown fire. So if you don't remove it, you're going to build up more and more. So there's more dry biomass built up, so that, like I said, it won't just go on the ground, it will go up into the trees. We want to monitor what's going on. Close monitoring can prevent fires from happening, or going from not too bad to terrible. Prescribed burns. What you want to do is you do burns occasionally, so that the fuel for the large fires go away, so that all the stuff on the bottom are burnt up and not stored, so that it can go from basically just a ground fire to a crown fire. Because then you want to get rid of the dead trees, because those are basically so the diseases can come in and affect other ones. You want to have small controlled fires to get rid of the biomass. So you want to have this fire in here where it's going to get rid of the small stuff, but you want to do that every 10 to 15 years as opposed to waiting 80 years and seeing, where you're going to have a whole bunch of stuff on the ground where it's going to have nasty consequences. So right here, we get rid of these nutrients for the fire, but also what happens is by having the fire, the nutrients go back into the soil so that it's available for new grass and for the trees. So a practice, FRQ, identify 2 characteristics of a forest that develop when fires are suppressed, like what's happening in Angeles Crest over the last 80 years. Explain how prescribed burns could address each of these characteristics. Thank you.